All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. It's Dan and Nick coming at you. A little bit of a midweek update. One of the few weeks we're going to have over the next couple months where Chelsea do not have a midweek fixture to worry about as schedules get readjusted, as League Cup matches filter their way in, as Thursday night Europa Conference League
Thursday
football.
night football.
Look, everybody's there for Thursday night. That's what we know. I think that's how the song goes. But anyway, we are going to give a little bit of a run through on everything that's been going on in the wide world of Chelsea at the moment. We're talking about lots of injury updates from friends of the pod, Nizar Kinsella and others, about who's available, who's potentially coming back into the fold, being spotted at training for the first time, coming out of the cave. We also have the best and worst under Maresca so far. We want to start to pick at a little bit of who's helping and maybe who's hurting or not contributing where they need to be in the side. There's also a couple of interesting headlines around appointments from other media organizations into senior roles at Chelsea, both in the men's and women's team. There's the released audio about the Mateo Kovacic handball that was not awarded as a penalty that we can talk about here. Again, Anthony Taylor just coming up in spades the last couple of days. Some injuries for the Chelsea women's team, and then also the kickoff to their season against Aston Villa. We're going to cover in general, Nick. It is a good part of the season in the midweek where we don't have a match because you can't be disappointed. Yeah, you just have the workday to disappoint you. Chelsea football could not disappoint you.
Yeah, you just have that little thing called work, I find myself longing for Thursday night football, and that's not where you want to be. That's really not where you want to be. Um, Look, uh, midweek updates are typically a joyous occasion, and when we look at the injury list, there's some things in here, Dan, that perhaps are not as joyful, that we'll touch on here in a second. I think some groans were heard around the Chelsea verse today about one Captain Reece James, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't want to start with the negative, even though that the report from Nizar Kinsella and others coming out, and this is the one we're looking at from the BBC, just that Captain Reece James was out with a hamstring injury, remains out with the injury, and there's no sign of an imminent return. I think we were all hopeful that given a wish, a prayer of a return timeline sometime early after the international break would have been phenomenal, given the injury concerns of Malo Gusto right at the end of the first set of matches under Enzo Maresca. We would have loved to see a return to Reece James. That would have given us a lot of opportunity to flex in and out of the side. That did not happen. So we'll couch that for a second. In the good news category, Romeo Lavia back in training with the group. Again, there are different phases, right? Like if you're independent training, sometimes that indicates that maybe you're just not at the right stage of your rehab yet to be
Correct.
with the group. It's a little bit more intensive in terms of the drills and the expectations. So usually if you're sequestered, that can signal that things are not as good. There's no signal that Reece James is training. There's a signal, though, that Lavia, Gusto, Ben Chilwell back with the senior team training. So, I mean, these are all very, very positive things. Enzo, Dewsbury Hall, both back in training as well. So, like, in general, good news for Enzo Maresca in that we have a couple players, some of whom you would argue are very critical to the success of this team. Some who have been out in the cold might find their way back in due to injuries, who are now going to get an opportunity potentially under him. I mean, just in general, anyone that you want to start with. I think the Chill one's interesting. I think Gusto being back healthy is interesting. Where do you want to go first?
Yeah, Gusto, because of Reece James, is the most critical one, right? Because I think we saw um, the the three center backs maybe not being the best option for us, especially against teams that want to play on the counter or who high press into mistakes. And I think Gusto is an accomplished passer. He has shown a great ability to break out of close control situations. When pressed, he obviously has a phenomenal amount of skill to his bag, and so this is one that, like, because Reese is hurt and continues to be hurt, And because he was injured for parts of last year, I'm like kind of holding my breath on because it's going to be a long old season, Dan, if both of these guys can't remain healthy or
Yeah.
if they get extended further than they should because the other one isn't healthy. You know what I'm saying? So like just as we saw last year, there are knock-ons. Like if Reese is hurt for the foreseeable future and Gusto has, because he is the best option in that role, if not for Reece James, has to play more matches than maybe his body can and should, then he gets hurt and that is just how, squads are supposed to be built to insulate from those types of things. And unfortunately, we just have a double jeopardy situation here where my hope is that Gusto gets worked back in, that maybe he's like a 60-minute player for the next few matches and maybe gets spelled at the end by someone like Akeem Pong or Disasi or someone that can work for 30 minutes just to make sure that he's back up and fit and ready for the long haul. Because basically after the next international break, it is on. Like the race to the festive fixtures is going to be intense. You have Carabao Cup, you have the Conference League, and you have a just killer Premier League schedule in that time. So he has to be healthy.
You're talking about the Liverpool, Newcastle, United, Arsenal run of fixtures for Chelsea back to back to back in the Premier League. A very unkind run with also a little bit of travel just sprinkled in there for some of our, trips to Greece and other places to get some of these matches done as it relates to our Europa Conference League hopes, dreams, and aspirations. I think the interesting thing to me. So I do think Gusto works his way back in. Akeem Palm coming in and potentially getting an opportunity against Barrow. I think Barrow is a very interesting fixture to me
Hmm.
coming up next week to see where Maresca with a fixture in the weekend and then transitioning into having a weekend game, a midweek game and a weekend game. What will he do as these matches start to stack? Who will he start to kind of rotate in? We saw only the earliest stages of that with, I think, really a not fully formed starting 11, or at least confidence in who those starting 11 individuals were. Maybe we see some interesting thilings there. I do think Chilwell's an interesting one for me, and I know that he's a little bit more divided, in terms of the opinion he generates right now. Just does he fit what Enzo Maresca wants the team to do? I do think with the injury concerns, you could run into that scenario, and I think we saw this against Dortmund previously, where and under Graham Potter, Mark Cucurella was used as right back. Like, is there a scenario where Ben Chilwell's on the left as a left back? You see Mark Cucurella as a right back, and that kind of is a better solution if Gusto's not fully fit, if Gusto needs to be spelled at periods, then potentially what we've seen so far, which is Axel Disasi at right back, which is not super compelling. The move of West Fofana, which was a little bit better in our most recent match at right back than the Axel Disasi experiment was. Like, I think there is some things and flexibility for Maresca to play around with some of these players becoming healthy again, and in general also having a full complement of midfielders again, with Enzo being healthy. If Lavia can get back to being fit and available, like, those are very, very good signs, particularly because Lavia was looking like he was going to contribute in those first couple, like those last couple matches before picking up the injury. I think there was something like, oh, might be something here.
Yeah, I mean Enzo, Dewsbury Hall, and Lavia coming back would obviously be a huge boost to the midfield. Now, I think your question for all of these midfielders is like, where do they play and how do they partner, right? Playing Caicedo every single match for 100 matches in a season is simply not a viable solution. And we know that Caicedo does a whole lot. He's probably the most complete midfielder that we have, and that he has shown great ability at times. But we also know that he can get worn down, just like anyone. And he probably has the most demanding role on the field for us to keep everything together. And I think we saw him desperately struggle to try and do that against Bournemouth and with limited, I think impact. So I guess my thought here is like, can you figure out between Lavia and Caicedo and Dewsbury Hall and Enzo, and maybe Vega, although I wasn't super convinced about that. Maybe that's a cup sort of option for midfield is Renato Vega, that can you figure out a way to pair some creativity that Enzo and maybe Dewsbury Hall have with the structure that maybe Lavia and Caicedo offer? That would be my big challenge here. And can you do it in a way that doesn't exhaust, Enzo or Caicedo, right? Like when Enzo is not fit, it's not good. Obviously, end of last year we kind of saw the worst of that, but I think Dewsbury Hall has to show us something coming up. He's not playing any of those front roles that I think maybe he was a little bit more accustomed to at Leicester, where he got some flexibility to move out to the left from that number 8 role. Like that role is essentially eliminated if you're going to play Nkunku or Palmer in a 10. So if you're going to play with 2 6s, he's going to have to figure out how to play as a 6 and continue to move the ball and cover and tackle and do some of the things that a midfielder would do, and just maybe forego some of the more attacking things that maybe he was used to doing last year because the personnel, the team structure, the talent is different. He's going to be the interesting one here. Like I think you can make a case for the other three that they kind of sort of fit ish in those double sixes. He's the one that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb to me, and it's going to be up to Maresca to get it to work. This is his boy, right?
Mhm.
So I am really, really, truly interested in that. And I don't want to rush Lavia back because, like
Yeah.
Gusto, if he goes out for an extended period of time, that puts more pressure on Caicedo. That puts more pressure on Enzo, so on and so forth. And then that becomes a huge, huge, huge issue.
So, things to kind of keep in mind as relates to the squad. We're going to talk a little bit more about them, best and worst under
Mhm.
Enzo Maresco so far. And do we agree with those Sofa Score ratings on who those top 3 and bottom 3 are so far? But first, ad break. We're going to get out of the way and then we'll be right back. Okay. So, we have the Sofa Score sheet here, Nick. I'll run through the top couple and then I'll also kind of go through who is hanging out in the cellar, but it is no surprise, probably, if you have eyeballs and if you know who our most valuable player was last season, to see Cole Palmer at the top of the chart. And this is a rating out of 10, right? So it's based upon the accumulated points, how the points are awarded. It's kind of like who's line anyway. The points are just there as an ambiguous understanding of a calculation that may or may not exist to humankind. 7.73 for Cole Palmer at the top of the ticket. Nana Madueke, not far off in second place, 7.67, with a very small sample size. It is a tie for third with Jaden Sancho and Romeo Lavia with a 7.30. And then I'll give you the fifth person here just to it's big old Bob Sanchez with the 7.28 is your top 5 in terms of sofa score ratings, carried very heavily by his last performance because that was not where he was sitting
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah. I was about to say, like, man, that's when you're 0 for and you finally get a hit in the majors, and now you're batting 192 instead. Yeah, look, I would have Cole and Noni as 1 and 2. I think that's pretty conclusive at this phase of the season. I'm
Mhm.
relatively happy with that. But you have to throw out Sancho. You have to throw out Lavia. Their sample size is too small, right? I understand how they got here just on strict scores alone, but we have to use our heads. Those two have to move. They have to get out of the way. Sanchez, I would not have in my top 3. That does not make any sense to me. The person that I would have as my third, and I'm kind of torn between two guys, but I think one has had just slightly more impact than the other. I have to go down to number 7, Christopher
Mm.
Nkunku at a 7.05, tied with Levi Colwell at 7.05 in the 8th spot. And I have to put Nkunku up there. I mean, he's had a bright start to the season. I know that he hasn't been a Premier League starter to this point, been more of a substitute slash cup matches sort of person. But I think given that and the preseason, is unofficial, but I think Noni kind of factors in this as well. this is a guy for me that at the start of the season, that 7.05 seems perhaps a little harsh, and perhaps it should be a little higher. You know, if you swap Sanchez and him, that yeah, I would be a little happier with that, I think. Um, so I would throw those as my top three, and they're all attackers, which tells you that we haven't had much success in the midfield or defensively this season. But you know, I'm happy with Nkunku and the way that he has gone, and I'm happy with Madueke, and I'm happy with Palmer.
Well, I mean, if you consider that the fact that we are at 2 goals a game on average right now on the matches we played in the Premier League, which is just a hair behind the 2.03 that we averaged last season. We are also technically so far conceding less. Last season, we conceded 1.66 goals per game, 63 total in the league. Right now, we're at 1.25 with 5 goals. So it's a +3 goal difference across the board. So
Okay.
it I think it's fair to say the attackers would be the individuals drawing most of the attention. I think where I'm probably would say I agree with you, like Jaden and Lavia. I think you just kind of have to say not enough minutes. I mean, Lavia has 66 minutes so far in the Premier League this season, which is double what he had for Chelsea all of last season. And then you have Sancho, who just had a very, very bright, very respectable 45-minute cameo that definitely was phenomenal. Definitely played a
Yeah.
contributing factor in Chelsea's win over the weekend. I think I go Caicedo and Colwell. Actually, I would push those two higher just from a
Yeah.
contribution effort in terms of like the minutes that they played. And look, there have been a couple of big mistakes from both of them across the couple of matches here, but there's also a lot of figuring this team out, getting it settled. I think it's Levi Colwell, Wes Fafana, Sanchez are the three players who have a perfect minutes record this season. And I would say if I would take Sanchez and Colwell are probably the two that are going to get closest to the end of the season and be at that like potentially played every Premier League minute available to them this season based upon just kind of where they're at the moment. So I don't know if I like I'm super disappointed in this. I actually feel like based upon the eye test I would throw up, kind of feels right.
Who in this list, Dan, do you think is misscored the most?
Ooh, that's a good one. Man. So there's a couple interesting ones because I think Marco Correa at a 6.98 feels very interesting to me.
Yep.
Like I think that might just be down to like he's picked
The
up
amount of the amount
a
of goals
card
we've conceded to like just total goals conceded maybe at this point.
two cards in the first four matches. Like that's not great to have from a Premier League perspective. I mean, he Wes Cole and Nico all on two cards already. Like that is a concern, and that's been hampered a little bit by one Anthony Taylor being involved in multiple matches Chelsea have played this season, which is just the absolute effing worst. I think Kugre is probably the one that I would say is the most interestingly rated. I would say. Um, I don't know if there's another one that like, unless you have a different one,
Let me give you one. Mikhailo Mudrik is rated a 6.8.
feels generous.
Feels incredibly generous when you consider that he's been one of our lower performers. I'd throw him down there with Dewsbury Hall, and Dewsbury Hall is a 6.35.
To be fair, again, this is Premier League minutes, so he is effectively played 62 minutes, right? So he hasn't even gotten a full 90 off of one
Fair.
start and
Yeah.
one assist. Like I think there are a couple players it's easier to say like yes, of course they'd be a little bit higher. I mean, maybe the interesting one like Nico Jackson right now. I mean, he has 2 goals and an assist, 3 goal contributions in the Premier League across kind of all matches played for us so far. I mean, he's right there with Madueke in terms of three behind Cole with 5. So, I mean, that feels like he could be rated a little higher, but I know he does miss some chances. He does pick up some cards. He's not a perfect player. Again, someone who it feels like you love him or you hate him type of player. That feels maybe where he could be maybe rated a little higher.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised um that he's not a little higher, to be honest with you. Um yeah, this is interesting. I like your Pedro Netos probably don't have enough.
180 minutes
Oh, he does.
four
Yeah.
matches played, 2 starts.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a 6.7. So, yeah, it's an interesting list. I mean, where do you want to take
Gui at the
this?
bottom feels very unfair on 24 minutes. I'm
Uh,
just that feels like a very unfortunate thing for him at a 6'3". I'm very sorry for him. I do think the Axel Disasi at 19 though, that feels very right with the performances that we've seen from him this season. And again, like we're 60 minutes from him, right? But like I think that was a pretty unfortunate 60 minutes that he played. So like I have to hope he can push forward this season. But if we're talking about just like who's helping, who's hurting, like that was not a great performance that we saw from him this past weekend. Hopefully, he can rebound from that. Again, it's very early in the season, but I think this is like a good little like litmus test of just like, do we feel like the players are contributing? Do we feel like they're heading in the right direction? Do we think Maresca has an opportunity to kind of fix, resolve, address the issues, and can he rely upon those individuals? And again, like I don't think a lot of people would have said Madueke was going to be the second best contributor in the team, maybe from preseason, maybe from the end of last season. But I think you would have said, hey, it's probably Cole, Nico, and then maybe someone like Madueke jumps into it. But to be second overall, I mean, I think that this speaks to how good he has been and where he can continue to contribute. And hopefully he establishes himself, and can maintain that over the course of the season.
yeah, I mean, an interesting note here, and maybe I'll make a slight adjustment to my list. If this is just Premier League, then Nico has to be above Nkunku, right?
I think it's based upon total minutes and what they do with those minutes. So, like, the more you are on the pitch and you don't do anything of note, it continues to average out at a lower rate.
Yeah, but he's contributed more. I don't know. Interesting. I don't know. Good thought exercise for a little bit of a midweek slumber.
Well, talk about thought exercises because there's another interesting experiment heading Chelsea's way as it relates to a big brain, not brig brain, moves by the front office. Because there's a report from The Athletic earlier today, Liam Toomey and others kind of putting together a report that Minnesota Timberwolves executive VP Sachin Gupta is going to be joining Chelsea. And that's someone who has 18 years in the NBA with teams like the Houston Rockets, the Philadelphia 76ers, with the trust the process mentality. So you can take that as you will. And the Detroit Pistons before being with the Timberwolves. He also, I thought this was interesting. Is someone who has used this before. He created the NBA trade machine for ESPN in 2006, which lets you play with the like, hey, if I have a player and I want to get a player for another team, would the trade actually work and potentially go forward? Very, very cool tool. And so clearly a bit of a stat nerd, clearly a bit of a tools nerd in terms of what he might be able to bring to Chelsea. But any thoughts on the move? Again, I think we don't know what the position is. It's not necessarily finalized other than just this reporting. So we have to wait for official confirmation on the club's website to talk a little bit more about like what is he going to be doing with this specific remit, who does he report to, or where does he report within the structure? I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but just any general thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a very Clear Lake hire based on the reporting that has
So
been
not
done.
a Bully hire, a
I
Clear
don't.
Lake hire.
It does feel like a Clear Lake hire. Yeah. The NBA trade machine, man. What a throwback! What a throwback to back in the day. That was the old ESPN.com. That was a very, very ahead of its time website, but still very bad. And that was like the predecessor to what we have now in fantasy football in the States for the NFL, which is like the Watson trade analyzer. Like that was like the old school. That was like the abacus to the new big brain stuff. So yeah, very interesting. But yeah, I mean, it fits Dan, it fits their money ball. How do we find the best talent at the right stage to not only avoid paying like huge transfer fees, which of course upsets the balance of the budget, but how do we find the right players to develop? How do we find gems that maybe no one else is looking at that can be, the next Cole Palmer or whatever? So it kind of screams, you know, not major kind of player identification, but more kind of underneath the radar. Maybe helps with the academy a little bit, developing some of those younger players and finding pathways. Maybe figures out ways to identify other leagues out there that are developing talent. I don't know. It seems like it could be a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, but big analysis background, and that the club has been building up the analyst group for some time, so it does kind of fit there. And I'm curious if he maybe heads that group up.
Well, we will see when it gets potentially officially announced, because again, it's not done until it ends up on chelseafc.com. But more to come on that one. But again, we're going to get a last ad break out of the way because we have to talk about a little bit more Anthony Taylor nonsense. No surprise. Some bad news for Bon Pastore relates to the health of a key individual within the team, given some of the injury concerns we have, the kickstart to their season, and also a executive hire on their side. But that's right. Last ad break out of the way, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, so this one was interesting coming into the fact that we knew that the VAR audio, the video assisted referee audio, was going to be coming out. And one of the ones that has come out recently is from our first match of the Premier League season, which was the non handball moment from Mateo Kovacic, which when we were at Legends Pub, Nick, when we were there, I have this philosophy that if you could get like three random people from any team and just like get them together and be like, "Hey, was it a penalty or was it not?" And you can have them be opposition fans. It would be a far better experience of what we're witnessing with the way that these matches are officiated. We learned that close proximity and referees call were the reasons, with the additional explanation that Howard Webb says he puts his left leg out to try to intercept the ball, which causes naturally his right arm to come up. The ball is played against him from a short distance. We think that's all very natural, part and parcel of playing the game. I got one word for you, Nick. It's corrupt.
Yeah, I think your point about, so one, this match was a month ago.
Yeah,
Um so good job on the timeliness here, folks. Well done. Um and two, like your point about like three dudes in a room, three people in a room, sorry. Three people in a room of any other fan base besides the two teams that are playing. You get 30 seconds and all the video angles you can have in 30 seconds against the clock. I would bet a significant amount of money that a group of three people could come to a consensus that was fair and just. And it would be a probably a closer representation to the spirit of the game than what we currently have. Because what Howard Webb is trying to say here is I know exactly how Mateo Kovacic moves his body at all times. I know that when he puts his right leg out, that his arm goes up as well into a position where if the ball were to strike it, it's at the exact right height. It's these description, like I'm all for transparency. I'm all for learning about how these guys talk about these situations and like their thought process and stuff like that. This doesn't make them look better. Like it makes them look worse. And for the amount of time that this took, like Legends, it was hot in Legends that day. We didn't have an extra 4 minutes in there. It was steaming. It was hot. A lot of people upset. Like this is just not good enough for something that we see quite often
sure.
in the box, right? An arm goes up, the ball hits it, and the rules are pretty clear about what that means. Again, in the moment, we disagreed about this. And so this is just a peek behind the curtain. I didn't think it was a penalty in the moment, and you did. And again, three people in a room could probably come to some sort of consensus about that, right?
Sure.
Even though we disagreed in the moment, once I saw it on replay and saw the different angles, I was like, "Uh-oh, maybe." I didn't think they were actually going to give us a penalty, for God's sakes. Anthony
Of
Taylor
course
was in
not.
charge. Come on, that's just silly. But any other referee, perhaps we might have got a break there, and then at 2-1, you don't know what happens. You know, the Premier League is crazy. So yeah, I just this goes down to the standard of refereeing and the standard protocols that exist in so many matches. Like these situations happen all the time. This is not as if an eagle flies down and takes the ball mid-flight and flies away with it, and then we're all like, "Well, fuck, what do we do now?" We've never seen this before. Like, ball hits arm in box a lot. How are we not picking this up quicker? Like, how are we not identifying the offside move quicker? How are we not doing some like the standard operating
Sure.
procedure shit more quickly? It has to be quick. And I guarantee you 3 people in a room could do
Well, we'll see if anything, surprisingly nothing, will come from this other than just us being frustrated that Anthony Taylor is continuing to be allowed to officiate Chelsea matches. I'm reminded of Tuchel going after Anthony Taylor. And I mean, look, I feel like he was not always right on everything he did at Chelsea, but boy, oh boy, that man underlined, bold, and italicized his opinion about Anthony Taylor. And I think we as Chelsea supporters were in unilateral alignment with the way that he was framing the case.
He spoke for all of us that day, didn't he? Spoke
Yeah.
for all of us. That was a pretty cool moment. I mean, it was very because he was so German. Like Mourinho was a little sneakier with like, if I
Yes.
speak, I'm in big trouble, that sort of vibe. Tuchel is just like, it is impossible. He should not referee our matches anymore. And we're like, yes, thank you for saying it out loud. That is incredible.
Well, on slightly less exciting news than Chelsea getting screwed, is the fact that there is some bad news for Sonia Bonpastor, the Chelsea women's team manager, learning that uh, today Sophie Ingle is likely going to be out the entirety of the season with an ACL injury. Very disappointing to pick it up in a preseason fixture. We have seen a bit of a rise in ACLs on both the men's, but even particularly the women's side over the last few
Yep.
seasons. This is just another one in the list for Chelsea in terms of individuals who are picking up an ACL injury. Definitely something of look, Sophie Ingle didn't start every match last season, featured in 14 of the 22 matches last season across both the FAWSL season and also the Champions League matches we played. 9 total starts across those 22 matches. In general, is kind of a rotational player at this point for the team, Nick,
Yeah.
but was someone who is going to be relied upon, and definitely is someone who has been with the club a very long time now. 2018 joined. This is a for the second spell, was also there for 2012 and 2013. 11 trophies to her name. Like, this is someone who is definitely a figure within the side, and a very unfortunate way, particularly considering that this might have been like the last full season for Sophie, given some of the transition we've seen in the midfield position.
Yeah, this is a real shame because I mean she is a legend. I think your point about her being more of a rotation option over the last couple of years has been, it's been slowly trending that way. I mean, she was integral in like those 2018, 19, 20 seasons, and I think over the last few has kind of seen her role maybe shrink a little bit, but is a huge character, has huge leadership. Has been a national team captain, as an OBE. I mean, she is an unbelievable personality and person within this group. And it comes at a time for the Chelsea women where the season starts on Friday, right? This is all happening very quickly on Friday. And we have injuries right now to Sam Kerr, who's recovering from an ACL, Mia Fischel recovering from an ACL, Anik Nowen recovering from an ACL. Oriane Jean Francois, the new midfield signing over the summer, is just getting back from an ACL injury. Kat Macario back from a huge knee injury and has kind of slowly worked her way back. Wasn't able to participate in the Olympics this summer. Uh, Neve Charles dislocates her shoulder in the same game that Sophie Ingle tears her ACL, and then Erin Cuthbert, the one that we saw in New Jersey, we still aren't 100% sure when she's going to make her way back or what the issue was, if if anything. So there's a huge amount of injuries to really critical personnel here. And I was kind of playing the who the hell plays in midfield game for Chelsea Football Club on Friday, and I think it's probably your starting midfield of Shukanuskin and Vika Kaptein, with some sort of backup perhaps of uh, Julia Bartel, but she's just back from international duty, and we don't really know if Erin Cuthbert's going to be available quite so soon. And so you might have some scenario where someone has to drop back into a midfield role, or, more likely you have someone like Lucy Bronze step up, or Eve Parasite step up into midfield to take some of that burden away from, let's face it, it's a really young Shukanuska and a very young Vika Kaptein. I mean, these are really great midfield options, but they're incredibly young despite their prowess. So, very, very thin in the midfield department. Probably see Bronze or Parasite step up into those roles since we're a little deeper in defense, but not great.
Well, speaking of, as you reminded people, Chelsea's title defense. That's right. Can we stack another trophy? Can we absolutely bust open that trophy cabinet for the Chelsea women this season by adding more silverware to it with Sonia Bonpastor's first season at the club, also first season for a couple new players, lots of new additions. If you haven't listened to it, but go back to our episode with Rob, get a full run through on some of the changes to the side that we've done previously. But look, we host Aston Villa to start the season, and Chelsea did the business playing Aston Villa last season. It was a 6-0 win away, second best league outing of our entire season last year in the fifth match week. And then in the 19th match week, we had a 3-0 win at home. Look, several players. If you look at who enjoyed probably scoring against the most, it was Aggie Beaver Jones with a goal in both of the fixtures in terms of that. But again, a 9-0 aggregate across two games. Very, very good. When you think about it, Aston Villa absolutely the definition of a mid-table side in the FAWSL. It's a 12 team kind of end last season league, and they were square in seventh place as it relates to it. You look at some of their stats; they had a negative 16 goal difference to the Chelsea's plus 53 last season. So we did score on them for fun. We did clown on them a little bit, but the perfect type of game, I think, Nick, to start the season, to make sure everything's right, to continue to finalize. What are you hoping to see in this first game beyond a great win to kickstart the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, very intrigued to see kind of who lines up. I mean, in our special with Rob last week, and we've heard this from others as well. The first few weeks of the season are going to be for Sonia Bonpastor to learn about her team and learn who is meeting the standard, who isn't meeting the standard, and then to probably stick with those who are meeting the standard more often than not, even in a very crammed fixture list this year with the Champions League and all the cup competitions as well. And so these first handful of matches are critical for anyone who wants to play a lot of football for Chelsea this year. And so the things that I am most interested in obviously, for Chelsea playing at Kings Meadow is who kind of starts up front. We talked about who will be on the wings, who will play in that number 10 role, who will start up front at striker. These are all very interesting scenarios right now because I think on balance, if it were me, I would have Aggie as our starting striker, Guro and Lauren Guro on the left, Lauren through the middle, and JRK on the right, and then be able to bring in someone like Sandy Baltimore or Kat Macario, maybe to if she's ready to have a few minutes, see if Myra's healthy and ready to go. I think that's another one. I think probably working our way back up. The midfield we just talked about, how Shukanuskin and Vika Captain play. And then it will be interesting to see if Millie can maintain her role on the field as captain. Uh, Injury plagued last couple of seasons, has not had a very good run of it. I think really gutted out that World Cup and tried to do as much as she could to her own detriment. It'll be interesting if she can form that partnership with Bjorn, or if that place is going to be potentially occupied with somebody else. And so these are all the things that I'm most interested in. The goalkeeper battle is also going to be fascinating. Does Hannah Hampton retain her number one shirt, or is this Zashira Musovic coming back in after a really strong off season and preseason? All things that I would be looking forward to.
I feel like it's H squared double H. I think it's going to be Hannah Hampton, but we'll see because again, there's a lot to be decided. But look, if you're looking for some great Friday night football or Friday afternoon football here in the U.S., definitely make sure you check out the first competitive match for Sonia Bonpastor and the Chelsea women team this season. Again, is a title defense and absolutely want to see them smash it to start the season. As we round out, though, the last bit of tidbit and news was that Chelsea women have appointed a new chief executive officer. And remember, Chelsea spun out effectively the women's team. So like they kind of do have a bit of a different corporate operating structure. Three is their front of team kit sponsor this season. Chelsea's men's team and academy teams do not have a front of kit sponsor this season yet. So stay tuned on that one. This is, I think, a little interesting, right? So, Aki Mandar has coming from the Athletic and a bunch of kind of media background roles. Was a COO for the Telegraph. She's going to be taking over as the new CEO. Her kind of comment was, "I'm delighted to be joining Chelsea Women, particularly at such an exciting time in the club's history and women's football. They have long been a trailblazer in the sport with a rich history of success. I'm incredibly proud to be leading the club in this new era, which we have huge opportunities to grow. I'm looking forward to getting started." There's not a whole lot in terms of like, hey, what is the remit? What is she going to be doing necessarily? Is she going to be focused on? We have only a LinkedIn bio and a couple of comments on the Chelsea website. I do feel like this is a more to come type of thing, similar to what we'll get from the news about Gupta if he's officially confirmed to be joining the club. But just I think exciting to see the infrastructure being built out for the women's team to continue to see a focus on growing the exposure of the team, getting more people involved, getting more people excited, and hopefully more revenue streams because more revenue streams being more opportunity to leverage that investment to expand how this team can continue to be successful both on and off the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, her background suggests to me, I mean, one, she's incredibly accomplished. She is relatively young as well, so she's done a whole lot in her career to kind of get to this point. I think it's a well earned kind of station. But it suggests to me that there's a couple things at play. I think one, we all know that continuing to grow the women's game is the path forward if Chelsea want to maintain this separate structure that grows and it becomes more self-sustaining. That means more regularly filling up Stamford Bridge. That means hopefully negotiating even better TV rights when those are up next, and all the sorts of things that kind of help grow. She has media experience, so I think these are critical for someone in that role to know moving forward. And I also think that there's an entertainment background that she has that is critical. Chelsea have recently hired a director of entertainment, I think on the men's side as well. And I think this is a role that I've started to see even more in my day to day job become a thing, whether entertainment as content or entertainment as event experience. All of these things are big deals. And as someone who is in this CEO role, she's going to have to oversee all of the club, right? All the women's team. But I think having a particular eye on growth and having a particular eye on entertainment and how to broaden the reach of this amazing, amazing team, and the team that I think is going to win the Champions League this year, assuming we don't have 18 more injuries. Then you're in a really great spot with someone who I think understands the space, understands sport, has had an operational role in the past, so that's not scaring me in terms of like how you run this thing. I'm excited for her. I think this is going to be a pretty big deal, and it'd be great to talk to her and figure out kind of where her vision is for the club, moving forward and how she wants to grow.
Oh, look, exciting time for the women's team as they get ready to kickstart their season. New appointments, tons of new players, tons of new faces in the administrative side, in the coaching side, and then also in the playing side. So get involved, get stuck in with those. We've got plenty more content coming up for that. But look, you know, Chelsea are just going to continue doing the business, having fun, and hopefully winning. Yeah, we'll get another episode coming out later this week with a CFC Central match preview as relates to the West Ham match this upcoming weekend. So we will be there, and it'll also be another YouTube live experience for us. We'll be going live after the match, hopefully celebrating a Chelsea win with you all. But that's gonna do it for this episode. So hopefully you enjoyed this midweek update. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.